Tyler Bryden here. Very happy to be joined by Gabe Fontana. Gabe, this is almost a reunion that we're having here. We put some numbers on the board, about 15 years that we've known each other, and it's been a long time. And I'll just say a little quick point before I let you do an introduction. Like when I think of you, first of all, super nice guy, super funny guy. I also think you've got some instruments in the back. I remember watching some videos of you playing guitar, maybe the banjo, while also playing the harmonica at the same time. I also remember, and I hope I'm getting this right, you as a tree planter, very nature-oriented guy, and you've had a great sort of life through that, but you've not turned a different corner. I think what you're maybe working through is a little bit of how can you enter this digital world and some of the business and entrepreneurship world while probably maintaining some of that connection and things you love. So those are some deep assumptions from my part, but always a joy to see you, brother. And happy to let you do a little introduction, maybe a background and a little path on how you arrived where you are now.
Thanks, Tyler. And I think everything you said is relevant and accurate because I had a bit of an epiphany yesterday. A friend helped me come to the realization. So I've always struggled. I've had my business now for a year and 7 months. And prior to that, I was a tree planter for 7 years. I'd work in the off seasons, I'd go traveling. And it was when I was traveling abroad where I met so many people that were making money remotely. They were doing all these inspiring things. They were living life without being attached to a geographical location, and they were doing it fine. And it was just something so foreign to me, being from London, Ontario, that I knew that's what I wanted to do. After tree planting, I spent 5 years as an organic vegetable farmer, and that was in St. Thomas, Ontario. 2 seasons there, 1 season in London, and 2 seasons out near Creemore, Ontario. And then that I started taking online marketing courses. Actually, Sean Grabowski, our mutual friend, was an intern at your first company, 6'5", and he was doing a digital marketing internship, and I was doing a farm internship. But talking with him, he turned me on to some marketing courses because I told him I want to develop some skills that I can make money from anywhere in the world. And these skills, I didn't really get these skills from post-secondary or high school. Yeah. That's not where my focus was when I was 18, 19, 20. I finished university at 21. I had no idea what I was doing. So when I finally felt comfortable to launch my business after about 5 years of taking courses and not feeling ready, finally I decided to launch my business. Copywriting and web design is what I started in, but now that has grown into my main focus is web design, SEO, and content marketing strategy.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, first of all, I think giving ourselves some grace. I think the education system and even the path to success has changed so much, even from the generation above, the very traditional go to college. And just, I didn't really know exactly where the end destination is, but I think we were young, we were kids, and we just all thought it was going to take us somewhere. Congrats, you've been starting it. I know I built some relationships with some people for a long time who have had these ideas or thoughts in the fire, but never really executed on it. And I think one of the things is just to take the steps and get it going. So maybe if you could share a couple minutes on how the first year and a half's gone. You can be as light as you want. And that part's usually the first part sucks the most, but it's also the most intense and exciting. And I even look back onto the start of my journey and man, I learned a lot during that time. And all that pain was a good accelerant for intelligence and what I was trying to figure out later in life.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate in the sense that for the first bit of my business, I moved back to my parents' house because I had a safety net. Through my last year of farming, I listened to this one podcast called Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. And I listened to it every single day as I was weeding the rows, moving the cows, just farming. But I was learning how to build my business. And they were telling me to create spec pieces, build up a portfolio, get an online digital portfolio before you start pitching to people. So this is what I did. I listened to Nikki and Kate and their episodes. I followed their steps in the evenings. And then by the end of the farm season, I told the bosses, the farm owners, that I wouldn't be returning, told them my new path, and they were completely supportive. So I had about $6,000 or $7,000 in savings from that season as my safety net to launch my business. So I moved back home, expenses went way down. And The very first client, I thought that, okay, so there was this restaurant in Collingwood, which is close to where I was farming. That was going to be my first client. I loved their food. It was a great little establishment, very popular. It was known as the lunch spot. It was a small little place, really cute, but their website was horrible. It was outdated, and the guy knew it. And so I pitched him online via email, no response. Followed up a week later, no response. And I was like, I'm just going to go in and talk to the guy. And so I went in, told him, hey, Paul, it's me. I'm the one emailing you. And immediately his demeanor changed. He was completely receptive. He was like, oh, Gabe, yeah, I had such a bad experience with my last marketing team that I hired that my walls are up. But I see you. Let's sit down and talk. And we set up a meeting. And by the end of the meeting, I had my client officially. So I was moving out of the area with my client in the bag. And that was like, okay, it's going to happen. I got a client right away. And then the first real lesson occurred when I was getting my second client. It was a moving company in Toronto. And during the negotiations, I didn't understand what value I could bring to a company. I didn't know how to articulate my skill set. He just drove it down. And I remember like asking my dad for negotiation advice. And I ended up doing the project, a full website build, like 5-page website for a very small amount. And that was the first lesson, because when I finished building the website, I was like, okay, my time is so much more valuable than this. I can't go into this whole like price gouging scenario again. And it was another client. So in the first 90 days, I think I had 2 or 3 clients, website builds, and things were looking pretty good.
And
And
the moving company, did you go in person for that too? Or yeah, I'm interested because you talked about I think we're also inundated with digital sales and marketing right now, that the differentiator in that first client was actually walking in person and meeting that person.
yeah. And so the second client, they were in Toronto and I was in London. My friend lived in Liberty Village, and he saw in the Liberty Village Facebook group that a moving company was looking for a new website.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty good lead, and I reached out via email and Instagram, and that's how that formed.
And so now, and I see, because we write a little note before this, but you're looking for service-based businesses, home improvement, landscaping, moving, or fitness. So you've got a little bit of a niche, and that's probably one of the lessons that you've heard in all those podcasts and things. How about now? Have you been able to take those relationships, drive referrals? How are you acquiring customers now? And I know, just to add in a little bit of complexity into that, you've moved out of the parents' house. You're in Vancouver now. Vancouver is known for affordability, right? And how are you acquiring customers at this time?
Okay, pretty much since day one, my main strategy has been cold email outreach. And that is because of Nikki and Kate of that podcast. They really stress the selling without selling, taking a very personable approach, tailoring each email, making it super concise, making it client forward, not talking about myself until a few sentences in, being very complimentary. And most of my jobs have come from cold email outreach. And yeah, that's what I focused on in London. When I moved out of my parents, we first went to Medicine, Alberta, and that actually does have very low living expenses. And I was struggling to get new clients there. That was the hardest part for me, because I started my business in December, then January, February, March, April. In the first 4 months, I moved cities. I didn't feel like I was ready to do that. I was pretty comfortable with my parents, watching my safety net go down. And when I got to Medicine Hat, I was setting up meetings with people, but I wasn't getting anything until I spent some more time, and I just kept at it. I started meeting people again, like meeting people face to face seemed to be a big thing for me. As soon as I could get either on the phone with somebody or a face to face interaction, people sense that the trust kind of develops, the relationship builds, and that's been valuable. But it's always been cold email outreach, and I get responses from people and they tell me, Gabe, like your emails, I get 30 to 50 emails like this a day as a business owner.
Yeah.
So, but the responses I get are, your emails were a breath of fresh air. And that's what's been working for me. Most recently, I started cold calling, and that has been good as well, because it's tough though. That first minute is so challenging, but then as soon as we get past that first minute, if they're interested in talking, then I can just do what we're doing now and have a conversation about honesty, openness, and trust, I get great responses.
Yeah, and I think it's a good lesson because that experience that you had with that restaurant owner about being burned by previous marketing companies is a very common sentiment. And sometimes you then, as the next person working with that person who, like you said, they lower their barriers and try to trust someone again, you deal with the PTSD or the trauma of that. And I think that's, something that, I mean, you're a young guy. When you're a young guy, maybe we're not so young anymore, but what am I trying to say? Like, you're young and naive and you don't really understand what even businesses are, and that these are like a life source for people, and like how hard people have worked to build those things up and how much it means. And I think when you're young, you're like naive about that. And then you start to realize as you engage with these people, like how high stakes some of these things. If your restaurant is your source of living and you have a bad website, or for example, you screw something up, maybe it's low risk at that level where there's not like 10,000 people on their website every day looking at the new menu or anything like that. But still, you can just think of the high stakes in business for people. So I appreciate you taking the approach. And obviously you're like a very honest, nice guy. And so once people talk to you, it breaks through. Mm-hmm. You're giving me flashbacks of when I first started. I think I got early on a referral because what's nice is when you're starting out, people want to help you out. And that's a really nice thing that you should take as much advantage of as you can while you can, because it fades away. I got a website, I remember, for $5,000. I got a contract for $5,000. And I just thought, oh my God, I've made it. That website was 150 pages with products and all these images. And not only was that a nightmare, the final deployment of getting that site live, I just remember sitting at home with the servers not working and just tears streaming down my face, thinking how wonderful I thought that $5,000 was, and watching that all just fade away. I hope you don't quite end up there and that you can protect those moments early on, but those are almost unavoidable moments when you realize you've committed to something and maybe the old dollar equation doesn't end up at the end. But to see you cold calling and cold emailing people, a lot of people go into business, but then they don't want to do those parts of the business, which is something, or that's not really what they signed up for. They think it was going to be easier to get clients, things like that. So how you're feeling? Because I think one thing that I didn't realize is once you start building a website, my sort of iterative journey was, okay, I'm going to start building websites. Built websites, and then found out that no one was coming to those websites. So then I needed to move up the layer, analytics, SEO, then some paid advertising. That's how Sean and I met. How are you feeling? Because I find the idea of a website expands pretty quickly into other tasks.
Yeah. And I found that SEO was the natural progression for me afterwards. So I started really learning Google Analytics, Google Search Console, pairing those two immediately with the website build. Most of the websites I was building for people, those weren't connected. Even if the restaurant, for instance, they were operating for 10 years, not connected. The gym I recently did, 15 years of business, no analytics on the website. So that's a big thing. And then content marketing, right? Which I think we're going to get into today when we're talking about generative AI and whatnot. But content marketing is a big part of my business right now as a human content writer. I will go back and say that pitching has been great for me, but it's recommended from my coaches to do 25 pitches a week. I've never done that. The most I've ever done is about 5. And currently I haven't pitched in about 3 weeks. And because last month was, I'm doing it wrong is what I'm trying to say. Okay. I'm not pitching enough. And when things are good, I pump the brakes. And now when it's common for business owners, it's a common mistake, and it's happening to me right now. And I'm learning that I can't do that. I can't take 3-4 weeks off of not pitching, because now I'm worried about June and whatnot.
Yeah. It's a hard trade-off that you have to make, right? Because you land a client, and then because you're doing this stuff yourself, you're actually doing the work for your client. And then you are trying to keep the fire stoked for the next sort of clients. And there are not really any ways around that. Either you raise your fees or you start to hire people. But then the management of all those people starts to add huge layers of complexity. And that's something I'm dealing with. We've got a small team, 6 of them, and the most I've ever had on the team full-time was 8. Then I had a dozen contractors between developers, transcribers, and all this stuff. So that part is the hardest for me, managing people. So I think it's an interesting place that you're in. And ideally, I don't know what that looks like, but if you're starting to build these contracts, one of the things I didn't do well at the beginning was I would build the website and I wouldn't have any maintenance on the site built in, like a small monthly fee to build some recurring revenue. Hopefully you can start to mitigate the actual manual labor on those maintenance through better code or better websites or things like that. But that's like not an easy transition. And people then start to think, okay, I'm paying for you to build the website. And then now I'm paying you an extra 250, 500 bucks a month just to maintain it. And that's something that's counterintuitive to people, especially if they don't have analytics and all this stuff. So I don't think you're doing it wrong. I think it's just a natural balance that is really hard for any business owner as they both sell and actually implement the work together. So you talked about being a human writer, which is both usual and unusual right now based on what we're seeing. I started my first website in 2009. I started my first marketing really in 2013. Things have changed so much. Like we used to write everything manually. Then outsourcing began. So it started to move to the Philippines and maybe Pakistan. And then now, obviously, there's been a tipping point in terms of AI from SEO, which I think has been both. I see both sides of it because I leveraged it, programmatic AI SEO that's boosted up our website a lot and made us a lot of money. But at the same time, I'm also seeing like a degradation in trust around the web and the content that's on the web. It's all filled with AI nonsense. What I'm trying to get to is like, it's a very different time, the premium that people pay on content now. Like when I think about, do I want to pay a writer $250 for an article, just as an example? Obviously articles can be less or more, or I can pay an AI system 95 cents. That's a hard trade-off, especially through the lens of business. Now, in the end, I'll make one last note. A whole wave of websites is now getting penalized for all this AI content. So maybe that's something you lean into. But how are you thinking as you come into this industry as so much technology and AI also bleeds into everything?
Yeah, I think I definitely use human writer as a selling point. I try to lean into that because people are aware of core updates, getting penalized. Agency owners that hire me as a content writer for their clients, they're using a mix of AI writing, offshore writing, as well as people like myself that are more like in Canada, writing for Canadian clients and not using AI, or at least using it limited. Personally, I think generally, I don't think people realize how much content is part of their daily search engine lives. They don't understand what content is. And I feel like a lot of people don't really understand how important blogs are, because most of the answers we're getting on search engines are snippets from blogs, or they're like, those are what are providing the answers, in my opinion. You may not be reading the whole blogs, but readers are definitely using blogs to get answers. And as a writer, I'm reading blogs all the time. Like, it's part of my life. And I can immediately tell when an article just is not hitting. And it's mainly, it's probably because it's complete AI written. If you don't have ChatGPT 4, or if you don't have the premium AI software, like those articles are going to be pretty horrible. And I think for me, I can spot that pretty quickly. And I love working with agency owners who want to hire human writers. They see the value in that. Like, they're SEO experts more so than I am. And they're like, hey, I need a mix. I need some content that's written by humans. And that's generally what I'm seeing. So then they hire me, which is great.
Yeah. No, I think it's, like you said, it's very easy to spot those. Even some of the words that they use, I forget there was some analysis on some research papers that were published, and it was like just a density of absolutely and all these little words that these AI systems have learned and inject everywhere. And even if by default prompt an AI or a ChatGPT or GPT or whatever, Anthropic, they all say same structure with conclusion at the end and then their final summary paragraphs. So it's definitely noticeable. I loved Google search. Like, I love search. I love keywords. I love identifying opportunities, but I've definitely seen, even so Sean and I, who we used to work together 2015, 16, how much manual work we used to have to do on Google ads to now, which is basically almost fully automated. And whether we like it or not, in some cases that has improved performance. And in some cases, I think a lot of us feel like we're losing control over a system that we used to have a lot more control over. And that's both Google ads, and then that's even SEO, which over the last few weeks, we've seen the merge of Google AI overviews, which has been both interesting. We've also seen horrible results where talking about putting glue on your pizza and jumping off the San Francisco Bridge and all these inaccurate answers as everyone sort of races to try to put AI into their experiences. I guess you talk about content. You're mostly focused on writing, SEO. Any other sort of content marketing that you're thinking about? Or I know you're obviously interested in the generative AI angle. I'm not sure if you're thinking about visual assets and things like that, or you're more focused on the words.
Yeah, I haven't dabbled into the visual assets at all, but immediately after my last season of farming, I enrolled in a course. It was called the Comprehensive Copywriting Academy, led by those podcast hosts. And copywriting really stuck out to me in all the digital marketing courses I took. Out of everything, the analytics, the website design, all that stuff, it was the writing, the persuasive writing, the short, concise writing, meant to sell, meant to reach that target audience. And that really stuck to me. It's definitely the writing that I like to focus on. And if you can have a landing page like Google Ads, an advertisement that then leads to a landing page, and if that landing page is well written, that sales page, then that is super valuable. I'm not sure if people are using AI to come up with full sales pages and whatnot, but it's definitely, for me, it's writing centric. But I'm experimenting now with my own website, long form blog posts, pairing it with 5 to 10 minute video, YouTube video that's explaining the same content in the post, but in front of a camera with my face and my banjos in the back and in a much more conversational tone, and then trying to make snippets from that video.
Yeah.
This is what I'm trying to roll out for my clients. I've done for some clients, and I always do it for myself last, but now I'm trying to take a proactive approach and do that. That's what I'm trying to focus on right now, is that kind of content. So text and video.
It's interesting you say that. I think I've seen this trend a lot with like marketing, for example, marketing agencies, where some of the best marketing agencies like delivering that service for their customers, but then they don't do that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it speaks to both the resources required to do it. And I think it also speaks to, in some cases, the measurable sort of return on investment that those tasks take. Even for a marketing agency, you want to show that you're, feasible at doing this work. That's part of what you're selling. But for example, doing cold emailing, like that might be a more revenue generating activity for you than you creating videos and, for example, populating on a website. And just as you're starting a new website and building up that sort of domain authority, it can take months or years for you to start to get the traffic that you want that can actually convert. So again, maybe I think this is something that's like the hardest part of any business, which is like radically prioritizing which things are like going to achieve your goals, like in the short term and long term. And again, I've not figured that out. I struggle with that every single day. The one thing that I'm not more interested in, but I'm curious about, I think about this all the time too. You come from organic farming, tree planting, immersed in nature, I know tree planting in some case sometimes can be a bit of solitude, but also you're around people all the time. And it seems like you're now this relatively big pivot in your life where you're now moving a little bit more into this idea of the digital sort of nomad, work from home, be remote, be location, independent. Is that the ultimate goal? Is it for you to earn a good living with that flexibility in your life? Do you actually want to build a team? What's the actual outcome, or like where are you actually trying to get to?
Okay, so yeah, it's a great question, because my conversation with my friend yesterday, for the past year and 7 months, I've struggled coming up with my USP, my unique selling proposition. What makes me different than all the other website builders out there? I tried to niche down a few months ago in landscapers, restaurants, gyms. It was an attempt to niche down, and I chose 5 industries. Yeah. I can't come up with my positioning, right? So I was just hashing it out with my friend yesterday. And I told her, like, the feedback I usually get when I share my US with people is like, how I don't see how your past experiences relate to what you're trying to do right now. And she basically said to me, she was like, if you're an expert in farming, forestry, landscape, make that your niche, Gabe. Be a marketer for farmers. Start doing some market research into that. And it was like this light went off, okay, because that's why I started this, was to help farmers. While I was working for them, the farm owners, we talked about this a little bit before, but the amount of time that they spent on making that decision to make a $40,000 investment into a website or marketing strategy. This is a big decision for business owners. And I saw time and time again that typically they didn't feel good about the investment they made after working with the company or the agency. And to me, as I was building websites, I was just like blown away. I was like, yeah, I could build a website for $3,000 or $10,000 and it could be incredible. So now I'm at this point where literally yesterday I've decided for the next 6 months, I'm going to focus in on what I love, because the ultimate goal, which is farming, it's organic growing, it's the food system in Canada. So it's not just like a farmer marketing their products, but I'm going to reach out into agricultural equipment, associations across Canada, like Regenerative Organic Associations of Canada, Ecological Farmers of Ontario. There's all these associations, right, for agriculture in Canada that I want to use the skill sets that I've now. It's like I was distracted for a year and 7 months, where now I feel like, okay, no, this is actually why I started this down this path. And the end goal, to answer your question, was I want to be able to live a comfortable lifestyle, making money from this type of skill, marketing, from the computer. But ultimately, I want to be able to own my own land, my own farm, and not have to rely on farm income as my means of.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because that's really challenging. I've lived it for 5 years with other farmers. It was their risk, right? I was just there as a worker, and then I was a farm manager by the end for two years. And so the ultimate goal is, yeah, I want to make a living using my laptop, using these skills that I'm acquiring, and then be able to live the life that I want. And I've actually done that since day one. Like, I didn't start my business and start working 80 hours or 60 hours a week. I was tired of that from farming. So my first year of business, I really was working like 4 hours a day. I wasn't going all in. I was taking it easy. I really wanted to make sure I didn't burn out, overdo myself, because I wanted to do this in the long run. As things started picking up, I started experiencing success. I was then motivated to work 8 hours, 10 hours in the day. Now I enjoy it. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do. And so I enjoy it. But the end goal, another great quality of mine has been leadership. So tree planting, I was a crew boss for 4 seasons. So I hired teams of 16, interviewed, hired, and then managed the crews. I managed top performing crews of the company for multiple years in a row. And my crews were everyone wanted to be on my crew. We were making the most money. We were having the most fun. Things were good. Every role I've worked in, I've ended up in a management position because I'm just good with people. It's my strongest asset. The same with my dad. My mom was always in team leadership positions as well. She was in insurance. He was in sales. And I need to figure out how to lean into that, because I know, like you were saying, that running a team is hard. The payroll, the management. I actually thought your team would be a lot bigger than what it is. So that was cool to hear. It's a team of 6 or 8, you said. Being a company of 1 for now, maybe hiring some contractors in the near future. I've dabbled with that idea, but being a solopreneur right now, I'm not sure if I do want to have an agency. Maybe. I know I love managing teams, but to answer your question, I'm not sure what
They're hard choices. And I think a couple of lessons I learned from, going, like, when I was basically like, don't put the cart before the horse. Yes, that makes sense. Which was like, I would get a project and then try to hire people, thinking that more and more projects would come, and then they wouldn't. And so then all of a sudden I would have to lay these people off, and laying people off is like a horrible thing. It's very emotional. And even when COVID hit, I had to lay off. It was like 80% of the team. You know what I mean? It sucked. And building up a little bit of that network and that referral network and having a predictable form of revenue before you make that jump, unless you've got full faith and the term in software is like product market fit, like where your selling message is consistently generating leads and revenue, then that's a dangerous spot that you're putting yourself in and you're putting your team in. At one point I had to take out I'm so glad that I paid it all off, but I had to take like a loan out from Futurepreneur BDC, $60,000 at the time, which was like personally liable. And the amount of stress that put on me, just thinking about that thing looming over my head, and we're not making enough money as a business. And now I'm paying these employees who both care, but maybe don't care as much as I do, was like that was not a very fun time. So again, just we all have to go through the journey themselves. But if you can just put those couple sort of markers in place and do as much as you can while you can, it definitely saves a lot of stress and pain and even strained relationships. Or the other option is be much more flexible and just be more transparent with those relationships or contractors and find those people who are already doing other things. And then last point I just think is your team, your friend or mentor there, I think has made a great point about the niche and the knowledge that you already know. I think you're already jumping into a big sort of new thing, and you're seeing the hyper learning that's coming from it, but to build upon what you already know. And it's not just the communication that you can have with these people, if they're farming and organic farming, regenerative farming, that language. And so there's already such a layer of trust built up. And there's also metaphors that you can use when you're talking to them. It is about planting and diversifying your crops every year and making long-term investments. I think there's a lot of things that you can play around with there and messaging and sell, and even build your marketing as this farming metaphor, I think is really interesting and gives you a lot of creativity and sort of inspiration to operate on. And then the end vision is really interesting, going back to the farming without the sole income on that. And it's so interesting because people who are in tech and who have burnt out in tech, which is the opposite of what you've done, they all dream about the regenerative. They all want to go buy a plot of land and start farming. And that's the grass is greener side from people in tech. And I think it's hilarious. I have, some friends who said that they've had some people from tech move out near them and they're watching them go on this journey, and it's not as fun. It's a little bit of a nightmare for them as they learn how much work it is, even if you have an acre of land, like how much management that is. But I'm interested about this sort of, how are you feeling alignment wise? I find there's quite a stark, everything is a business. You get a little older and you realize that in some way, or some way of needing to manufacture enough income for livability. But there's a big conflict between regenerative farming, connected to nature, to what you're doing now. And maybe you're not feeling that as much, but just how are you feeling alignment wise? Because you've gone from planting to revenue generating, cold selling. That's quite a jump and a change of perspective.
Yeah, and when I was, I'd say 18 to 24, I was like anti-revenue.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't want to make money. I didn't want to feed into the system. That was very much my mindset. Like after university, after tree planting, my dad was like, hey, what's next? And it was a farm internship at 24 years old. Just like, what the hell, Gabe? But it ended up being the best thing ever. And I'm not sure if you've seen the music festival that I'm the creative director for. I started a music festival on the original farm that I started out with. This is our 4th year running it. Like that farm internship ended up being my education. I learned more in the 2 years on that first farm than I did in the 4 years of university because I was engaged. And my whole mindset around revenue and money has shifted. And I want to make money. I'm not afraid to say it. I want to make money. And the thing about marketing was a lot of people think that marketing is evil, but sorry, I should say a lot of farmers, a lot of anti-establishment, a lot of the crowd that I was hanging out with, young organic farmers. The truth is, like, I view it as I have the ability to connect people with businesses that they're going to love because that they need. Like it's connecting people with the right people. And that's what I view my services as. I'm working with business owners that I respect. I like their businesses. Most of the time I'm in their city. And that's why I landed that project, was because I genuinely like their gym. If I can connect, that's what it is for me. It's nothing to do with, there's no evil tactics. It's connecting people with the right businesses.
Yeah. That's a evolution that I've gone back and forth on so many times. Then you start to, like you said, you moved out to North Vancouver, you got bills to pay, you got things that you want to do, and you're also trying to build a future for when. I've recently started being more aggressive in saving and investing because I just thought, why am I even doing this? My younger perspective was like, I could die any minute. Why would I even do this? Doesn't make any sense. Let's go one life, live every day. But man, it's just weird biological, I think it's like biological time bombs that happen as you get a bit older. Like even for me, I was very anti-marriage, anti-kids. And now all of a sudden I just woke up one day. It's changed like that. So I don't know what that is. I'm still trying to figure that out. We're both young and old, working through that.
16-year-olds do not think we're young.
No, yeah, but that's true. And I remember being 16 and looking at people who look like me and being like, oh my God. So
God.
yeah, exactly. So I've been drilling you with questions. I know there's a couple things that you were maybe wanting to talk about. Is there anything that you want to go? I am still looking at this list, but anywhere you want to take this conversation?
I really want to learn from lessons that you've experienced. I want to know more about Speak AI. I want to know how a guy like me should be incorporating AI into my business, because I've tried certain things. I really loved lavender.io for email. That was a great software that I used. It helped me with my cold pitching. Assistance video transcription, I can see as very valuable, especially for a content writer, just to be able to, stuff like that. But no, I'm happy with where this conversation has naturally flowed.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things that are interesting. Right now, I think there's a generation who, even if they didn't read the book itself, was directly impacted by basically the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Yeah. And I remember listening to Tim in 2000. It's interesting you were talking about doing farming and listening to these podcasts. I was doing something very similar. I was driving a truck, listening to these podcasts and like hearing these guys who are just making a ton of money, but also like living this very work-life balance and being like, oh my God. And so I actually think there's a lot of opportunity in not mundane jobs or activities to educate yourself. So I'm glad that you took that opportunity. I went very much the same path. I think I had a really tough time in my early 20s, broke down and needed to regenerate myself. And I think through a lot of insecurity, I thought that I needed to prove to myself and anyone who saw me go through that I wasn't capable of something. And for some reason, that was like, you need to start a company. I was scared of just that corporate entry point and where that life could take. I have both good things about that and bad. Like one of the things I think about a lot is like opportunity cost, which is, for example, some of the people who I judged, it was a horrible, naive judgment, but like they went and got a job. This is a core concept that I absolutely hate, which is like, you were younger, there was this stigma around going directly to college and getting the trades. It was almost like that was for uneducated people. We were right on the edge of when that was like, go to university, get educated, and that's going to set you up. And I actually think that was a fallacy that was created. And so that I've seen so many people who fit that profile who have actually gone on, they got into the workforce earlier, started making money earlier, bought a house when it was low, their investments, like everything has gone where I went, okay, entrepreneurship, I'm going to take pay cuts early and to try to build this thing. And that opportunity cost, which is the income at that time that you could reinvest and then compound. So I think about that a lot as I've gone through this journey. The other big impactful book for me was a book called, which was when I was partway through my agency at 6'5", this is when Sean was working. We were actually in a really good spot. We figured out Google Ads. Really, there was a program called Google Grants for nonprofits. It was an easy niche. I was working with a bunch of nonprofits. I love them. Similar thing to what you're saying, where it was like, I could reach out to nonprofits. I knew they were doing good work. I could offer them $120,000 a year in free Google Ads through the Google Grant program and just pay me a small fee and I'll help manage it. It was like the easiest pitch. They're like, oh, do you want 120,000 USD a year free from Google? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Just pay me $500 a month and I'll manage it for you. And that was like how it went. And then the ROI was relatively easy to measure. All the analytics and everything was there. I read a book, which was about an agency owner who built an agency over 20 years, was a great agency. He went to sell it at the end of his life so he could retire. And they said that the agency isn't worth anything because all of that is created through you as the agency owner. And there's no repeatable processes or value in the business to sell. So that was a really transformational moment for me where I started to move into Speak AI and try to build software. I started this in 2019. We're 2024. Building software is way harder than building websites. It's like a nightmare. And from where I am, what's really hitting me now is how quickly things change. That's been the biggest takeaway over the last year and a half for me, because I've seen the graduate. We're now in something like, again, I don't know if the change is as acute in organic, restorative, regenerative farming, because in some way there's almost like an anti-technology bent to it. And maybe I'm wrong in that assumption. It's not like every regenerative farm is like an Amish one who is not accepting technology into it. But when you're in marketing and you're in AI and you're in high growth capitalism, the technology just comes in so quick. And so the changes with Google Ads, the changes with the SEO. I'm thinking about how when we started Speak AI, we were using what was cutting edge technology at the time. And now that technology is already like legacy, old school technology. And the stamina and the resilience and the speed that you need to operate to keep up when you're like in a competitive space or even in an adjacent competitive space with like large companies. I'll shut up and we'll turn this back into a conversation versus a rant. But one of the things I'm thinking about right now is I watched Amazon last year. I don't even know if it was last quarter, after all their revenue, all their expenses had $100 billion in cash left over. And so if you think about that, like there's companies right now who are trying to raise a couple $1 million so they can build tech. If Amazon just puts that $100 billion in a Simple savings account at 5%, they're printing money every single day. It's like a machine that never turns off. So I'm in a space right now where I'm trying to work through that. And I guess what I'm saying is the challenges never end, and the technology changes, and a value proposition you have today might be non-existent in a couple of years, or it could be a couple of weeks, that's the crazy part.
Product that you're building.
The software product that we're building, there's obviously OpenAI, and even for us, we built Speak, and it was very focused on audio and voice. How can we analyze voice data? But now models have come out that are fully multimodal. So now if you come into our system and you're only restricted to analyzing voice, you've now lost out on vision, like computer vision modalities. You've lost out on all these other modalities that now people are becoming accustomed and used to. So there's a huge shift that's happening across the sort of world right now in market. And frankly, a bit nerve-wracking. I am, very interested in where we play out. And my last note on this is like looping back to the tradesmen and the skilled people. For example, I remember Josh Van Giel building houses, right? That's a very tangible asset that is in high demand. And when I undertook the process of technology growing up, what I thought was the investment for the future, in which some ways I still believe in, was also you were training the data set for AI to replace you. And that's really interesting to me. Whereas when you're a plumber, you're an electrician, you're not training any AI to replace yourself. You're actually doing things that are very hard to replicate through technology and through even robots with dexterity and things. So they have a lot longer life ahead of them than maybe us. So that's my end of my rant.
You have me rethinking everything right now, Tyler.
Yeah. I didn't mean to do that to you.
What you're saying though about the software program and keeping up, because that exists for graphic designers, it exists for marketers, like having to upskill, but it seems like your product is at even higher pace. There's a little spectrum, right, with how fast things are moving. Farms being very slow, and Speak AI being closer to the top of that.
It's also that there's been a shift, right, with a macroeconomic shift with high interest rates and a more debt-ridden economy that's still trying to recover after the pandemic. And so money becoming more expensive and businesses needing to be even more precise on what the return on investment is. And I think as you work through your value proposition, while you're working on the website design and the SEO and these things, I think that measurable outcome is really important. The thing you'll find is you could create a report on analytics. The farmers are not going to look at it, but they want you to at least have some confidence that you have that perspective. And really what they're looking at is, okay, I don't care. This is not my specialty. What are the next 3 things we need to do? Like amount of reports I put together that no one ever looked at, or they would ask me, hey, do you have this information? I'm like, it's in the report. It still hurts my heart sometimes. Like I cringe. I tried to make them so good for so many years and no one.
When I see other agency owners, like when I see their reports that they send to clients, I'm like, oh man, I need to get myself some reports. I need to start building nice fancy reports to give to my clients. But you saying that is making me, and I've noticed this, I'm like, I've done it once and people just want to hear me tell them what.
Yeah. It's a good thing to set up with it takes up time, but if you can set up every quarter or even a monthly, if it's a bigger client, just have a quick 20-minute, 30-minute conversation where you present some insights because that's really what they're interested in. And I will say, creating reports now, the platform's called Looker Studio. It used to be called Data Studio. I know Sean and I spent a lot of time in that. You can relatively create repeatable template that's valuable for you, brand it, and then have it as just a little add-on for you and your customers kind of thing. And you can schedule it to go out weekly. Super nice platform, easy to use, and pull in SEO and pull in analytics all at the same time. And even if you spend a bit of time, it's a good practice for your own website and stuff too, just to get the full gauge on that. So I think where we go from here, sir. It's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to, you touched up on your life immediately after high school. And I remember the videos that you were posting on YouTube and just before you started 6'5". Like the vulnerability that you showed then made me feel closer to you. And that was obviously a horrible time of your life.
For sure. Yeah.
But you shared it. And I really love the approach you've taken throughout, sharing all the sides to Tyler, not being afraid to talk about psychedelics online, about your Burning Man experiences, about all of these things, right? Because a lot of people like to present themselves one way online. I just wanted to thank you because it was inspiring. You sharing all that made me feel closer to you. And yeah, I get what you said about you felt like you needed to prove to people that you had something to prove.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I still have a lot of resolve, but still I realize how many people around me that actually impacted. Man, life is crazy and it's hard. And I've always been sensitive and I have no idea what I'm saying when I open my mouth. It's like that Michael Scott quote in The Office, where I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know how I'm going to end this sentence when I start it. And that's like my whole life, just stream of consciousness, thoughts. And that's really all I've ever been able to do. My partner and I, we went and did ayahuasca in Mexico a couple months ago now. It feels like forever. We just did a reconnect with a bunch of people who went to the retreat, and a bunch of them were actually in GTA area. So that's another whole journey now that I'm going through all these experiences that I'm processing and figuring out. One of the big experiences there, not only was ayahuasca, we did the Bufo toad. Apparently they were saying like ayahuasca is like 0.0013 DMT, whereas the toad is like 5 to 15%. So that was a ridiculous experience. I just went to vibrational frequency land and realize that our whole life is about the frequency and energy that you bring into your life. And I think you've made a very deliberate choice to move out to North Vancouver, a place that you connect with, and even like centering and grounding yourself in a place that connects with you is like such a huge healing force and also like a generative force of inspiration. I think that's something I'm struggling with right now, which is like you talk about being a solo business owner, and something I'm trying to figure out right now, because although we have a small team of 6, we still all work remote. And I actually feel like it's been so long that I've worked relatively remote and with small teams that I'm missing out on an energetic exchange with people that is very energy inducing. When you're maybe mythical in my head, but you're out tree planting, you're with a big group, there's a lot of energy. It gives you that sort of motivation to push through the day because you're surrounded by other people who are pushing through the day. And I think as you go through this thing, you'll find you have these lapses of motivation when you're working remotely by yourself because you don't have anyone necessarily to talk to right in that moment who like understands that like problem that you're going through. And sometimes I can find it to be very isolating. And so I think you've always had a great group of friends around you and you've kept that connection. And I encourage you to do that, especially if you continue on the journey of like solo company builder, because it can be very lonely and it can be very energetically draining sometime to like, to keep up that motivation. And that's why I think also the more you can do to align the business with something that you're passionate about, like the farming and all this stuff, the easier it is to keep up that motivation. And I had a huge lapse the last year because it was actually one of the reasons I started speaking. There are multiple reasons. I saw an opportunity, but one of the things I was trying to figure out is throughout all the experiences I had gone through, I had been recording like voice notes, Evernote. I've been writing in my journal all the time. And I wanted to figure out this way to like historically analyze all my voice notes and Evernote to understand myself better. That was one of the weird core things. That's not where Speak ended up being, because it wasn't like a viable business. Like it was just not. So I had transitioned into this Frankenstein of business and all this stuff. But I think when GPT came out, I literally could take my Evernote, I could take my voice notes, I could plug it into the system, they could analyze it. I'm like, oh my God, the problem that I started to work on, or that I cared passionately about in 2016 or whenever I accepted this, is relatively solved. And that was a huge moment because it was like, what now? What now is the motivation if something that I was really passionate about solving is relatively solved through a technology? I wasn't the one who solved it. yes, I can integrate this technology into my own business. But it was a huge moment of almost like a vacuum of passion being removed. And you'll find that like on your journey, you feel passionate and then something will shake that element and you have to regenerate your own motivation. And when you're on your own, sometimes it's like a difficult thing to do. So I'm working through that right now and figuring out what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about SEO. I always have, but I'm seeing it slowly get eradicated by some of this AI creeping.
Your last Instagram post or your last couple it was scary a little bit hearing you talk about what does this mean for content producers? What does this mean for businesses that have worked so hard over the last decade on SEO and done? What does this mean, pretty much?
Yeah. And I actually don't even know if I'm asking this logically and rationally, if it's like emotionally, if I'm overreacting. I actually don't know what the truth score is. And what's scary around me is people who I often look at, who are also like who I look to, mentors or even people online who I have a lot of respect for. They also seem like they don't know. And that's when I get nervous. It's when I'm like, oh shit. And then I've also done a deeper dive into, I was talking about investing and all this stuff. And so I don't know why I got sucked into watching, it seems so hilarious to me, but watching Bloomberg. I just put it on in the background when I'm on lunch and they're talking about investment. And I've listened for now probably a year and a half and they're wrong every single day. Like they have not, it's so off, it's crazy. And so I'm like, oh shit, no one has any idea what's going on. And everyone's predictions are wrong. And so I think the part that I'm really focused on right now is adaptability. And I think also re-architecting my attempts to build networks, because when I was at Innovation Works in London, there was so much natural connection. I would see hundreds of people each day. A co-working space, I think, is a really valuable thing. And I thought there was some really interesting commentary recently about, although there's so much good digital remote possibilities, some sort of in-person connection is really important, because like you've seen, even selling to clients, it establishes a sense of trust in the sense that you're like a real person in this world where that discernment is like increasingly difficult.
Totally agree. And I went out to WeWork in Vancouver one day as a guest. Totally inspired. It was just before we moved out to Hornby for the winter. So I was about to be alone on this small island with no street lights, super dark winter. That Upwork experience was so inspiring. It was like the view was incredible, the view of the mountains and all these like people my age, just like working, running their own businesses, product marketing, that type of stuff. I do want to join Upwork once I can justify the monthly cost. But just the other day, I realized, okay, so the first 90 days of my company, I didn't face like some crazy challenges. It was actually pretty successful for me. Like I was on a high. But just recently, I realized I've been on a low, probably for the past 5 or 6 weeks. And I was hanging out with Sean the other night and we were talking, and as he was saying things about these highs and lows, and he wasn't trying to take away from my experience, he said that, but he didn't realize this, but I started tearing up in our conversation. And it was at that point I realized, oh, I'm really low right now. And I don't know if it's because I'm not having these interactions with people. Business isn't doing great. My expenses have gone up. I'm flying to London for weddings. I have these future expenses that are looming over me. I have some debt still. And everything just seems very tough right now. I've been focusing on long-term strategies I haven't been pitching because I've been focusing on these longer-term strategies, like trying to be guests on podcasts, joining referral networks, which I joined BNI, if you've ever heard of BNI.
Yeah.
I did that for the past 5 weeks and now I'm a member. I've been trying to focus on content for my own website. So I'm doing all of these things that aren't producing me income in hopes that through consistency over the next 3 to 6 months that they will. But my short term has suffered and I'm in a pretty low spot right now. But I can feel like I'm like just trust in the process. And I think when you tell a lot of people that these strategies are going to be like 3 to 6 months, it can be like a bit of a turnoff, but view it the other way. If that's a reason to start now, if you're telling me that I'm going to see a return on investment in 3 to 6 months or 8 to 12 months, why wouldn't I start right now? At least allocate some of my time towards that. every single week. And then hopefully I will see that return in 3 to 8 months.
Yeah, and I completely understand. And I think the part is that I experienced, first of all, the shitty part is it could take longer than that. The SEO for Speak took 4 years. So it's a long run. And I think also sometimes I'm doing it right now. Like I'm pushing the translation campaign live because we integrated translation into Speak and there was such a huge search opportunity. I spent a lot of time building that out, knowing that it's going to take at least 6 months. And I might have just jeopardized my whole site's SEO because of the amount of pages that I published. But you feel comfortable at least doing that because you're not being exposed to rejection through client calls or potential customer conversations. So sometimes it's just easier to sit on the computer and plan out long-term strategies versus doing sometimes the things that you need to do in the short term. So I think that you use the term, which is great, which is like allocation. And it's weird. It comes back to this Bloomberg thing that I keep listening. All these people are just constantly talking about predicting future scenarios and hedging their bets on those different scenarios or hedging risk. So a big person I love is like Ray Dalio. He's talked about uncorrelated investments, like invest in one thing and invest in something else that is completely uncorrelated. So if one thing breaks, then the other thing is not going to suffer. They need to be uncorrelated. So what am I trying? I'm just trying to say in that content, longer term strategy, make that a percentage of your allocation, but it can't be all, because if you can't meet the short term requirements, then the long term is not going to matter. That's a shitty reality.
The lesson I'm learning right now.
Yeah. And it's a lesson that we're constantly learning. And again, it feels good when you get a win, but euphoria only lasts for so long because then it just turns into real work. And it might have been you bitten off more work than you even originally thought. And so then you go through that cycle. And again, I think it's difficult. Entrepreneurship and running one thing, I think there's a lot of, I think part of it is shitty as you get inundated with messages from digital nomad people who seem like they're just living a great life, and it's not necessarily true, and that's part of their thing. Or even you look at all these pretty people at WeWork and you have no idea what they're actually doing on their lap, or the same anxiety that they're feeling, they're looking over at the mountain.
Or they're or like you hear that they were a solopreneur but now they're running a team of 20. You just think, oh wow, these people they're doing it, but who knows? They probably have more stress than me. I'm not sure.
That's a whole new level of scale and responsibility. And I think that's one thing. I had a therapist that I worked with because I had been similar to you. I just ended up as a captain on every hockey team and all these stuff. And so it just felt like a natural progression. And she told me that she was an executive coach and leadership coach in her. So it was really interesting dynamic. But she said, there's so many people who think that they want to be leaders and company owners until they have to do it. And I think so much of it comes down to self-awareness of what you're trying to optimize for. And that's why I was asking, what's the long-term goal? And in some cases, I think sometimes we are, what am I trying to say? Like we're creating a path to get to a long-term goal. And it's almost like, I'm not saying this is you, but I've done this, which it's like an excuse to not do the long-term goal because it's so scary if you fail. You know what I mean? So it's almost like easier to take not my stupid example, but when I was growing up, I literally thought I was like, I loved hip hop. I love freestyling. I thought I could be a hip hop artist, but I was like, you know what? The risk level is so high on that. What I'm going to learn how to do is run a company so that I can make a money so I could then make hip hop music. Whereas I literally should have just made hip hop music. And so I spent, if I did that, I would be an expert. And instead I spent 10 years becoming an expert at this. And now I don't even want to go back to that because I'm 10 years into this. And that's like the weird, I think twisted brain that we can sometimes have as people. I do think you've made a very logical assessment where it's very hard to just live off the income of a farm. So there is an actual nice diversification element in that. This is, as much as I'm saying this to you, I'm also saying it to myself. It's just figure out what you truly want and what you're optimizing for. Because if you set that target and you're deluding yourself in that moment and you're lying to yourself, even just to try to put yourself in a better situation, you ride the boat and then your real goal was over there and you realize you now have to take a long route to get back to that goal.
Completely valid. And it is scary. It's a form of long-term procrastination for sure. And I think definitely the biggest goal is to have a healthy work-life balance and to be able to just stop working whenever I want throughout the day, to play a song on the guitar, to be my own boss so that I can run errands during the day. I can be there. If I do have a family, I can be fully present whenever I choose to be, to relocate and to have complete control over my income. Those are the to be able to act like if I working for somebody else, you don't have complete control over your income.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. It's just time and wage. And I don't need much to live the life that I lead. And so far, as long as I can just keep getting better and making it work, this is definitely, I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I am excited I'm really nervous about switching. I'm going to keep doing some market research for this week and making sure that there's a viable market for me to be the farm marketer. But I know it's probably a right idea because I'm really excited about it right now.
Yeah, I think it makes sense from an outside perspective and what I know about you. So I think, I'm excited to follow along. I see you're very active on LinkedIn and stuff, and that makes me, I think that in self is inspiring. I don't know. I think you've always been such a nice guy. And I think the nice guy is both, what's funny is it's both a very valuable thing and it's also a detriment sometimes. You want to make people happy. You want to please people. And sometimes in business, you also have to get very, not combative in a bad way, but you need to know your value and step your foot in the ground. That's something that I'm still learning every single day here now. So I guess anything else that you want to go through? This was a deep, wide ranging conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I feel we got through it. I'm happy to reconnect at some point. I'm going to keep following along, and I'm planning my own trip out to Vancouver here, probably some point later this year. I'll shoot you a note. Would love to get together in person, see you and Sean if you're both there. And anything else you're thinking before we close this out, sir?
No, that's all. Selfishly, I wanted to just get in touch with you again. I've been following you for years now, so I'm glad we had this opportunity to talk. And let's have another conversation 6 months down the line and
Yeah,
see
beautiful.
what's changed.
And before I go, classic marketing, any call to action here for anyone who made it through this whole conversation?
If you're a farmer and you struggle to find
There we go.
you can reach out to me. No, but yeah, I build websites for small businesses and I employ a content marketing strategy to increase website traffic. I track, I analyze, and I make sure that people are visiting your website, staying on them, and calling you or filling out your form.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much, sir. I'll turn off the recording here now. For anyone who checked this out, I appreciate you. Appreciate you very much.